The storm came fast. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled like a growl of anger, and rain poured in sheets that blurred the world. On a lonely roadside, under the flicker of a broken street lamp, sat a little wheelchair. Inside it, a girl. Small, fragile, terrified. Her name was Sophie, just 9 years old, her legs paralyzed from a car accident the year before. She clutched her backpack to her chest, soaked to the bone, her lips trembling as water dripped from her tangled hair. She had been on her way home from a tutoring center when her ride never showed up. The rain trapped her there, wheels stuck in mud, unable to move forward or back. Cars passed, their headlights slicing through the downpour, but no one stopped. Until one car did. A sleek black sedan rolled to the side. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in an expensive suit, now quickly getting drenched. His name was Richard Hale. A self-made millionaire CEO, the kind of man who usually had drivers and bodyguards and never wasted time. Tonight, though, he was driving himself back from a meeting he hadn't even wanted to attend. He almost kept going. Almost. But something in the sight of that little girl frozen under the storm made him stop. "Hey, sweetheart," Richard said, crouching down despite the rain soaking his pressed shirt. "Are you alone? Where are your parents?" Sophie's voice cracked. "And my mom was supposed to pick me up. But she never came. My chair's stuck." Richard looked down at her mud-caked wheels. He sighed. Then, without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, far too light for a child her age. "Don't worry," he whispered. "You're safe now." Inside his warm car, Richard draped his own suit jacket over her trembling body. He handed her a bottle of water and turned up the heat. Sophie's eyes, wide and innocent, studied him. "Are you a businessman?" she asked, noticing his expensive watch. Richard chuckled. "Something like that." Then Sophie said something that pierced his chest. "My mom says rich people don't care about kids like me. She says, we're invisible." The words landed like thunder. Richard had spent years building companies, chasing profits, ignoring people he thought didn't matter. But hearing it from this little girl, it hurt in a way no board meeting or failure ever had. Richard couldn't just drop her off. He needed to know she was safe. Together, they drove through flooded streets until they found Sophie's apartment complex, a crumbling building on the poorer side of town. Her mother burst out the door when she saw the car. A single mom, exhausted and frantic, tears running down her face. She hugged Sophie like she had almost lost her forever. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "The bus broke down. I couldn't get to you." Richard stood back, watching the reunion. Something about it twisted inside him. He had everything. Wealth, power, comfort. But in that tiny apartment, love was what mattered most. Before he left, Sophie tugged his hand. "Thank you, mister. You're the first person who stopped." Her small fingers left a warmth in his heart that no money ever had. The storm passed, but Richard couldn't shake Sophie from his mind. The image of her alone, helpless, abandoned in the rain haunted him. At dawn, he made a decision. He called his board. He canceled meetings. He redirected funds. Within weeks, a brand new foundation was born, the Sophie Project, dedicated to building accessible transportation and safe learning centers for children with disabilities. The very first ribbon cutting? Sophie herself, sitting proudly in her wheelchair, holding giant scissors with her mom's help. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. But Richard only looked at her, the little girl who had changed everything. At the ceremony, Sophie whispered something in his ear. "You're not invisible either, Mr. Richard. People see you now because you helped me." His eyes burned with tears he hadn't shed in decades. That single sentence, spoken by a child, shattered every wall around his heart. From that day forward, Richard wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who stopped, a man who noticed, a man who cared. And Sophie? She wasn't just the girl stranded in a storm. She became the spark of a movement that changed thousands of lives. Because sometimes, the greatest storms lead us straight to the people who were meant to change us forever. And one act of kindness can rewrite an entire world. Never underestimate the power of stopping to help. What may be small for you could mean everything to someone else. That Richard's life shifted in ways he never imagined. For years, he had been known as a man who never stopped, never slowed down, never allowed distractions to pull him away from his goals. But after that storm, he found himself pausing more often. He began noticing things he had once overlooked. The man in the subway playing guitar for coins, the waitress who smiled through exhaustion, the janitor cleaning his corporate office after midnight. Sophie had opened his eyes. One evening, weeks after the ribbon cutting of the Sophie project, Richard received a small package at his office. Inside was a drawing, made with crayons on wrinkled paper. It showed a stick-figure girl in a wheelchair, holding hands with a tall man in a suit under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, Sophie had written, "Thank you for stopping." He placed it in a frame, right on his desk, above all his awards and certificates. That drawing became his compass. Months passed, and the Sophie project grew. Accessible buses rolled out across the city, ramps were built at schools that had never thought to install them, and free tutoring centers opened for children with special needs. Parents began writing letters, telling Richard how their children's lives had changed, how kids who once felt invisible were now seen, heard, and given dignity. But Richard didn't stop there. He visited the centers personally. He sat with kids, played games, and listened to their stories. His board of directors was baffled. This wasn't the ruthless CEO they knew. But investors noticed something too. His companies weren't failing. In fact, they were thriving. Employees worked harder, with pride, knowing their leader cared about more than just profit. The change in Richard spread like wildfire. One rainy night, almost a year to the day after that storm, he returned to Sophie's neighborhood. He knocked on the old apartment door. Sophie answered, her smile wide, her wheelchair decorated with stickers of stars and flowers. "Mr. Richard," she shouted, throwing her arms up. "I've been waiting for you." Her mom welcomed him in. The apartment was still small, but it was brighter now, filled with laughter instead of worry. Over dinner, Sophie told him something that made his throat tighten. "You know what I want to be when I grow up? A helper. Like you." Because one night, when it was dark and scary, someone stopped. Richard looked at her, realizing that he hadn't just saved Sophie that stormy night, she had saved him. Years later, when Sophie grew older, she became a public speaker, advocating for children with disabilities. She always told the story of the night she was stranded in the rain, and the man who stopped when everyone else passed by. And Richard Hale, the once untouchable CEO, sat in the front row every time, clapping louder than anyone else, his eyes shining with pride. That night in the thunderstorm had changed everything for both of them. Because kindness is never wasted. It ripples outward, from one life to another, until the whole world feels its warmth. And sometimes, all it takes is one person who decides not to keep driving.